All right, let's do a little bit of a review and a Monday morning quarterbacking of my interview earlier this week with 2024 Republican presidential candidate Vivek Ramaswamy. Now, I am going to be the first to tell you this guy is an excellent filibusterer. And one of the things about dealing with such good filibusterers is that it can become really difficult to go point by point by point. And I am the first to tell you, I don't think I did a great job of controlling that interview. And there is no one to blame but me. And so for everybody writing in saying, David, you let him get away with this, you let him get away with that, I'm with you. It was a barrage of distortions and filibustering. For the most part, I do think that his extreme nature presented in an incredibly polished package came through. Many of you wrote to me and said, he's so slick, but if you really listen to the words coming out of his mouth and understand what he's saying, he's pretty bonkers. So what I want to do today is go through some of the claims that he made and sort of fact check or give you the reality of them. These are the things that the most number of people wrote to me about. Now, I'm not going to play every clip. I'll summarize what Vivek said in good faith. If I played every clip, this would take an hour. And a lot of people heard the interview already. So you could watch this, listen to this first, then check out the interview, or pause, check out the interview with Vivek, and then come back. But I'm not going to play every clip because I think it'll be repetitive. I'll summarize as best I can. One of the things that Vivek said is that the lack of publication widely of the Hunter Biden laptop story arguably gave the election to Joe Biden. And what Vivek said was that lots of people said they would have changed their vote and if they had seen the Hunter Biden story fully before the election, and that it is a form of election interference. Now, Vivek did not say where he got that polling data, but there is a Tip Insights poll. They are a right-leaning polling outfit. They did a poll from December 7th to December 9th. 2 years after the election of Joe Biden, asking people about the laptop story. That poll found that among those following the Hunter Biden laptop story, 28% would have very likely changed their vote if they knew about the laptop story not being disinformation. 25% were somewhat likely, which is a less clear response. But what you have to understand is that, number one, this poll was conducted 2 years after the election. Exactly whether people remember how they would have changed their vote had they known something 2 years prior is pretty shaky. And number two, the pool of respondents who answered the question, it's all about among those following the Hunter Biden story, which is a relatively small group of people because it has nothing to do with Joe Biden. And then number three, the respondents were right-leaning. So when they say I would have changed my vote, I guess you have to believe that these right-leaning people voted for Biden, but they would. It just is completely incoherent. So that's the only poll on this issue I was able to find. And Vivek completely misstated the meaning of it. At best, it's a nonsense claim. At worst, he was deliberately deceptive about that poll. Secondly, Vivek said that the Burisma payments to Hunter Biden are a deep problem, $5 million paid by a Ukrainian company, privately owned by someone who sat on the National Security Council in Ukraine, and that led to the impeachment of Trump, who said do more investigation, and that this has implications for Hunter Biden, and that this implicates Joe Biden, and blah, 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 blah. And Vivek's point is, if the Burisma story wasn't suppressed, that also could have changed the results of the election. What we get back to here is something I've said before. If there are allegations that a crime took place, investigate them. Understand that, number one, there's an incredible hypocrisy. Even if we assume everything being alleged about Joe and Hunter Biden is true, for which there is currently no evidence, these folks like Vivek are hypocrites because they say nothing about Jared and Ivanka Trump. Remember, Jared Kushner scores a $2 billion investment from Saudi Arabia, et cetera, et cetera. And there is actually no evidence of Joe Biden being linked to these Burisma payments. There is certainly no evidence of a crime, et cetera. Now, as for the claim that the Trump Mar-a-Lago documents indictment was timed to distract from the Biden bribery story. That's another claim that Vivek made. They indicted Trump on the documents to distract from Biden accepting bribes. There's just no evidence for that. This is the opinion that's being stated by many. There's no evidence for it. I do think it is a fair debate to have. Was the New York Post story right to be censored on Twitter or not? I'm willing to have that debate, and I have an open mind. Ultimately, it's smoke and mirrors to distract from the original claim that that story altered the 2020 election results. We don't have any evidence that that's the case. Thirdly, on COVID, Vivek Ramaswamy said that there was a point at which if you suggested COVID came from a lab in China, you were called racist and you got banned. Now, we do know that there was a period during which Facebook banned posts claiming COVID was made in a lab. Our accounts, even just talking about that, even though we weren't making that claim, sometimes had problems on Facebook. We were flagged for COVID disinformation on Instagram simply for discussing that topic. So Vivek is not wrong that there was a point, maybe not racist, but there were limitations on being able to talk about that on social media. I think it's perfectly fair to discuss whether that was right or wrong. The second part, though, where Vivek says we now know it originated from a lab. We don't know that. There is no definitive evidence that COVID came from a lab. I don't know that we can rule it out. I'm not claiming we can. I've always said investigate everything, but let's only go as far as the evidence takes us. I think that that's a perfectly fine discussion to have. We have not proven that COVID came from a lab. That's another claim that Vivek made. Number 4, Vivek Ramaswamy said that my definition of woke, which is woke means to become aware of problems in society that are bigger than any one person and that require systemic or structural fixes. Vivek said that my definition of woke doesn't support the specificity of policies that follow from wokeness, like racial quotas in boardrooms, or Vivek claimed that companies can't be listed on the NASDAQ unless they have racial diversity quotas on their boards. That is a lie. I had never heard that before. I was unable to rebut it at the time because I'd never heard it. I researched it. NASDAQ requires that companies either comply or simply report their boardroom diversity. You can still list on the NASDAQ if you don't meet racial quotas. You just have to say, hey, we didn't meet that requirement, and here's why. You could argue that that's a problem in and of itself, but again, Vivek misstated the truth of that policy. Argument 5 from Vivek. He said, I believe gender dysphoria in kids is a mental health condition and should be treated as such. He cited the DSM-4 and 5, said if a child has gender dysphoria, it shows that there's something else happening in their life that must be addressed. He said it's not compassionate to affirm what is ultimately just confusion, and says that we will look back at allowing kids to undergo what he called genital mutilation as an injustice. He says people are going through this because of a fixation on trans in our culture, that there's a contagion of sorts. Now, there's a bunch of problems with what he said. First of all, asserting that gender dysphoria is a mental health condition is not necessarily controversial. In fact, as I pointed out, it is dealt with as a mental health condition, as a matter of protocol. And we'll talk about that. The problem is that the right uses that language to stigmatize trans people and to basically argue that as a matter of obvious principle, no medication solutions, no gender affirming care, period. We are talking about gender dysphoria as a mental health condition. The difference between Vivek Ramaswamy and the doctors that actually specialize in this is that Vivek views trans identity as simply pathological and something to be removed from society and essentially disqualified as a serious thing to be dealt with, period. The medical guidelines have a harm reduction model. This has been studied. This includes initially dealing with it as a mental health condition. It includes counseling. It includes exploring so-called puberty blockers. It includes exploring surgical and non-surgical interventions. What would have been interesting to delve into more, and this came right at the end of the interview, is what does, if we say, okay, mental health condition, at least as frontline, what does Vivek Ramaswamy think the treatment should be? And contrary to what Vivek said, it's compassionate to affirm gender dysphoria in children. That is what the standard of care is. If you look at any serious medical organization in the US or elsewhere, that's the front line. You assess and you treat, and you focus on whether there are coexisting mental health conditions. It's right there in the treatment guidelines. When someone presents with what is apparent gender dysphoria, you explore and evaluate whether there are coexisting mental health conditions. What he says should be done actually is done without taking a position on the good or bad of puberty blockers. The side effects for puberty blockers short term are quite mild. It's headache and fatigue, muscle ache, maybe insomnia, can affect mood and weight to some degree. We do need more research on the long-term effects of puberty blockers. I have said there may be some issues there, but we need to do it in good faith, not in this kind of eliminationist rhetoric that Vivek Ramaswamy and others use. And by the way, puberty blockers are not only prescribed for gender dysphoria. And this is something that some of the opponents will never mention. Puberty blockers are also prescribed to cisgender kids who start puberty abnormally early. Sometimes in adults, puberty blockers are used to treat endometriosis or breast and prostate cancer, PCOS, polycystic ovary syndrome. So the idea that puberty blockers and their side effects are only relevant or in play when it comes to kids with gender dysphoria, that's also wrong. Medications have risks, and it's about evaluating benefits versus risks, etc. Now, for the general narrative that Vivek put out there about detransitioning and the number of people that regret gender affirming care, those cases exist. We shouldn't pretend that they don't. They are insanely rare. There was a review done of 27 studies in the US, Canada, and Europe. On average, 1% of those who receive gender affirming care regret it. 1 out of 100. And for some, that regret was temporary. So the number that genuinely, over the long term, regret gender affirming care is under 1%. If you compare that to the 20 or 30% of people who regret getting a knee replacement, because often the knee is never the same and you deal with a different issue with the knee than the one that brought you in the first place, 20 to 30% of those getting knee replacements regret it. Under 1% of those receiving gender affirming care regret it. So I think that that's an important thing to consider. And then lastly, Vivek argued that there's a social contagion element to gender dysphoria. I was not able to find evidence that supported that. He cited something from New Hampshire, I think, was not able to find evidence that supported that that's a thing. So think about how long it takes me here to break down all of these distortions. He is excellent at just firing them off. And we actually need, and this is what makes fact-checking these people so difficult, it's a barrage of falsehoods. And as Sam Harris said, you can very easily set a bunch of small fires, and it becomes difficult to chase every single one with a fire extinguisher. So those are some of the main distortions from Vivek Ramaswamy. He's welcome back anytime, as I said. I don't know that we will see him back, but that's where we are.